Sydney.
And I'm Claire.
And welcome to the first Take Time Book Club. We are reading Take My Hand, and we're discussing part 1 of the book. So if you haven't read it yet, pause the video, go read it, because there will be spoilers. So to catch everyone up on what we know so far, the main character, her name is Sybil Townsend, and she's actually the daughter of a doctor who we refer to as Dr. Townsend, and her mother who we refer to as Mrs. Townsend. And her mother is an artist slash mom, but she didn't really make her living as an artist, if that makes sense, which we'll explain more as we talk about the book. So Sybil is tasked with taking care of 2 little girls, Erica, who is 13, and then India, who is 11, and she's tasked with giving them shots to act as a birth control. And so throughout the book, we see all these complicated emotions come up. There's also a character, Ty, who's Sybil's childhood best friend slash ex-boyfriend. There's Alicia, who's her best friend that she meets while working as a nurse. And then I forgot to mention Erica and India, they live with their father, Mace, and then their grandmother, Miss Williams. So far in the book, like I was saying, Sybil's working as a nurse. She's taking care of these 2 girls. And she's really working through what it means to be part of a community and take care of a community. She is a graduate of Tuskegee, and so she's having these complicated feelings as she learns about the side effect of these shots, especially because the syphilis experiment that they did on the black man at Tuskegee is just really hitting the news also. So this book opens up in 2016. It goes back and forth in time between 2016 and 1973. So that is what we know so far, and now to dive into the discussion. Okay, so my first question for you guys is, what are your initial thoughts about the book?
Okay, when I first read this book, one of the things I loved and noticed quickly was that the chapters are pretty short. Mm-hmm. I love historical fiction, but sometimes the long chapters, I'm kind of like, okay, where's this going? But I feel like this book is perfectly paced. One thing I also really love too is how the author explains the nuances and complexities of the town early on. Mm-hmm. Even though she doesn't explicitly say things at the ready, she does kind of hint at things here and there so that you as a reader can piece it together yourself before she kind of does a big reveal. So I always think that's just so wonderful when I read a book, especially historical fiction too.
Yeah, I don't read a ton of historical fiction, so I was a little bit scared going into this, but I really did enjoy it. And similarly to Claire, I really enjoyed how short the chapters were. I felt like it kept up with the pacing. I would say one thing that really struck me was the timeline that they used, switching back between like I guess what is the present in the book and the past, and I thought that really aided because it kind of helped with her journey of being kind of, I don't know, guilty about what happened. So this whole time you're kind of in 2016 thinking about what this guilt means.
Yeah. That's one of the major themes that I have written down about the book is the idea of guilt. Obviously one of like is body autonomy and what it means to be able to make decisions. Community is a major one. Class and money. The idea of like a savior complex, reproductive health. And I feel like right away we really get to see these themes come up, especially in part 1. I was like, whoa. Because one thing that I tend to not like about historical fiction, it makes me kind of scared to read the genre, is like you were saying, it's like really long and you're like, oh, this seems like a great plot.
Yeah.
But it's like the chapters are like 50 pages long and you're like, what is happening right now?
Right.
So this, I really think the author did a really great job of making sure it's attention grabbing.
I also think too, now that you mentioned about like the attention grabbing historical plot, this is a book where if you don't have any like background knowledge of Alabama 1973 or you don't have any background knowledge on like medical history, you can still read this book, which I think is really great because at first kind of going into this I was like, oh, this is like a medical book or like historical fiction, like do I need to know like different terminology or what things mean? But the author does such a good way of organically explaining things that as you read the chapters, you're like, oh, okay, like I understand what's happening here. Yes. So I think that's really great too.
Yeah. I think that another thing that stood out to me about like what type of book this was gonna be is very early on you learn that she has a daughter who is adopted, and you also learn that she was never married, and then you also learn about her past and how she had an abortion when she was younger.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was a really great introduction to the character, because we're talking about reproductive justice, and we're talking about body autonomy, and I think that through this lens of motherhood was really interesting.
It really is interesting. So one of the things that I want to bring up, since you talk about how she did have an abortion and she has this complicated relationship and she has her own experiences that she's bringing into this job that's supposed to help people decide their reproductive futures, how do you think the idea or the fear of perception plays a role in Sybil's life and the other characters? Because one thing that I noticed is she's not only really scared about being perceived as like uppity or upper class, like she drives her mom's older car rather than her new car that she got as a graduation present, but then also she's really fearful about people finding out about the abortion that she had. She doesn't tell her parents, she doesn't tell her friends, she never discusses it with Ty, who was her childhood best friend, and she kind of closes herself off to that relationship after that happens. So how did you guys see this idea of perception when it come up in the book, and what did it make you think about, and what do we think is going to happen next because of that? I know, a very wordy question, but
It was a good question though. I feel like the major thing that stuck out to me about perception was when her father was talking to her about why she wouldn't want to just join his practice, and her kind of explaining that she wants to really make a difference in the world, but her father was scared of having her be out there and like being so exposed. And then later on, when she was saying that she felt so disconnected from other parts of the community, because the perception the Townsends are a very like wealthy family, and they have a lot of access. And I felt like that access kind of protected Sybil, but now that she was really like working and she was kind of making her own way, it really said a lot about like what you're exposed to and what you understand. And I think even the fact that she didn't really understand how the Williams were living, and I think that showed a lot about like perception and kind of creating the world that you want to create instead of living in the world, I guess.
I agree with that. I think one thing that stood out to me was how kind of in the first couple of chapters in the book, she was listing out like her parents' accomplishments and how her mom, belonged to the Lynx, and how her dad was in the Boule, which are two very like elite Black organizations, and they do a lot of like work for the Black community, but just like from a different perspective, different lens. And even though her parents are in these organizations, her dad was telling her, hey, like, you don't want to go out there and like help those girls get those girl shots. Like, it will not be anything you expect, and like you never know what's gonna happen to you. Like, I don't want you going there.
Yeah, he even tells her, he says like, stay in the car. He's like, don't go up to their door, stay in the car, honk your horn essentially to get them to come outside, and like don't interact with them really.
Yeah, and then like I don't need to jump ahead, but like when she goes into the house and like describes like the smells, and then basically like living in squalor in this like tiny like shack. It's not even a house, it's like a shack, and it's behind like this white family's house that where at first she was like, is this their house? But then she sees like the two white boys on the corner, and she's like, well, this can't possibly be their house. And then they tell her like, oh no, it's like back down there. And I think the author did a good description of literally her jaw dropping. Like, she's just like, oh my gosh. And I think in that moment, her entire world just shattered. Like, everything she knew or she thought she knew.
Let me see if I can find it while you're talking about it.
Yeah, I think I wrote a note about it, I want to say.
Yeah.
Oh, but this is this is on page 9.
Oh.
But she talks about how they discussed Fanon and Baldwin at dinner, debated Dubois in Washington, spoke admirably of Angela Davis, and then she also talked about To Her Car, of course, but she talks about how they live in this neighborhood just down from Alabama State, and she said, all my life I've been surrounded by educated people. And so even in the early chapters, you see how she has this kind of like construct of like what Black people can be and the possibilities they can attain. But I think her reality was like living in 1973 in Alabama, she was part of a very small minority of African Americans. And I think because of like her bubble innocence, she didn't realize that. But when she met the Williams sisters, like her whole life just like turned upside down basically.
And she says on 23, you can just see the clear contrast. On page 23, she says, she opened the door for me, and she is Erica here, which is the older sister. She opened the door for me. The screen pulled away from the edge of the wooden frame. Not much protection against the flies. It creaked on its hinges. I'm not sure if I said this before, but walking into that house changed my life. And yes, it changed theirs too. I walked right up in there with my file and bag of medicine, ready to save somebody. Little old me. 5'5" of know-it-all. The first thing that hit me was the odor. Urine, body funk, dog. All mixed with the stench of something salty, stewing in a pot. A one-room house encased in rotten boards. A single window with a piece of sheet hanging over it. It was dark except for the sun streaming through the screen door and peeking through the holes in the walls. And as my eyes adjusted, I saw there were clothes piled on the bed as if someone had stopped by and dumped them. Pots, pans, and shoes lay strewn about on the dirt floor. Flies buzzed and circled the air. 4 people lived in one room, and there wasn't enough space. A lot of people in Alabama didn't have running water, but this was beyond that. I had to fight back vomit. And so that first description is just so, it places you really right there. It's so
vivid.
Yeah. Exactly.
And like you feel like a certain emotion, like when you read it, you feel, I think her going from the beginning of the book and talking about her life and her parents' accomplishments and successes to going to her stepping in this one-room shack. I mean, I felt like my heart just dropped, kind of, in a sense.
And so it also leads to this idea of like class and like money divide, because as we learn when she first meets the grandmother, she's like, oh, she can't see, she needs glasses. And then eventually she meets the father and she realizes that the father can't read.
Right.
And so in the beginning of the book, like you were talking, she's talking about her parents are part of this upper class, how she's part of this upper class, she's able to go to school, study to be a nurse. The people that her family's in community with, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're white collar professionals. And so she realizes that people just don't have access is a major thing.
Yeah. I don't know where it was exactly, and I'm trying to look at my notes, but I don't know if I wrote it down, but there's a part where she talks about how back then they really did think that the community was like united, because after all what happened, by the 70s, they were like, okay, now's the time, like we're finally moving as a unit. And she talks about the 2 biggest divides then were still education and like monetary income. And I thought that was really telling, because I think this is what the book kind of set its premise on. Like, yes, we're talking about reproductive justice and reproductive rights, but at the background of this, it's a conversation about education and money and what value that brings to someone's life. So I thought that was really interesting that she took the time to point out that those were the 2 biggest divides back then, and how this kind of shapes the rest of the story.
And if you think about it, in the beginning, what is the her supervisor's name?
Seeger, I think, or
something with the S. It's escaping me now.
Seeger. Linda Seeger.
And she's a white woman. And so in the book, she says some pretty wild things, but I'm trying to see if I can find a page for it. Okay, I can't find the page. I'll find it eventually. But there's this theme of the savior complex. So Seeger, one time she refers to them as like the hands of God helping people. Another time she refers to the nurses as helping people. She says like, we're helping people that can't help themselves. So it's this idea that being poor is associated with not being allowed to have autonomy, which is something that we see come up time and time again, especially for Black bodies throughout the history of this country, and not just the 70s, and it's continued even now, right? We have people denied access to reproductive health care based off where they live, and it made me think of a class I actually took last semester, and I took, it's called Sex, Sexuality, and the State, or maybe Gender, Sex, and State, something like that. But anyways, it made me think about how so many Black people live in the South, and the South is one of the hardest places to get reproductive health care. So disproportionately, policies are affecting Black women. And in this case, we see that this idea of being poor, not having access to education, results in, spoiler, major spoiler, but these girls having tubal ligation against their will because their grandmother can't read. Seeger knows this, brings papers to the house, and says, oh, fill this out.
Yeah.
And it's terrible. And that's actually where the end that we leave off on part 1, with Sybil realizing this, and then she gets in a car crash. But it's just terrible because of these complicated ideas and this constant abuse by systems of power.
I think it's really interesting the way that God and religion is discussed in this book. Like, obviously we're in the South, yes, but I think also the way that it's framed, like Seeker, the supervisor, says that like they have the hands of God, while in comparison, someone like Alicia, she says that she's doing this work because she wants people to know that God is real, and she wants to, through her work, communicate that God is real. So she's looking as a more of like, I don't know, maybe like a holy calling or like some type of way to show her commitment to God and her belief that God makes things better. Val, another nurse who's a little bit older than them, I believe they said she's like maybe 40-ish, I don't know. She's a little older, already has kids, her husband passed. And they position her as someone who's very thankful and very devout, and she kind of sees this nursing job as a blessing, I guess, because when her husband passed, he had enough money in his will for her to go to nursing school. So I think it's very interesting because they all kind of talk about God and like a spiritual calling to do this job, but it's positioned in different ways.
That's true.
That's definitely true.
And okay, so another thing, kind of pivoting with that, but also I guess on the same idea. So Sybil gives Miss Williams a Bible, and so she's like, oh, this is a Bible my mom wanted you to have. And Miss Williams is like, oh, this is amazing, right? And it's interesting the family's idea of faith, because we have the girls lost their mother, right? And they're very matter of fact about that. And so then we have their grandmother who, you know, she's experienced so much life, but she's really holding on to this idea of faith. And then we have Sybil, who has also a pretty strong sense of faith, at least of what we can see so far, but she feels almost like, I guess, like she's made a mistake, right? She has these complicated emotions when it comes to her past. So how do you think the characters kind of bounce back? And what do we see about their ability for redemption, for bouncing back when it comes to hard situations?
I think right now, Sybil has like a very complicated relationship, not only with Ty, because like Ty's her ex-boyfriend, like he like got her pregnant and then she had an abortion, right? But also to just within herself. Like I think that Sybil, when she got an abortion, it was a traumatic experience. She talks about Miss Pope being there to hold her hand, which is that her advisor or professor?
It was actually librarian.
Yes.
Tuskegee.
Okay. Her the librarian holding her hand, but like she still remembers like the pain and like all the trauma induced, because you know at the time, this is the early 70s, right? The medical abortions that were happening were a lot different, right? And a lot more invasive than today. And so I think one of the things is that Sybil hasn't really unpacked it because it's just like too painful for her to unpack. So I think when challenges happen, or like in her case when this happened, I think that she just kind of threw herself into her work more and like became more invested in her work, because she does talk about it, but when she talks about it, it's kind of like a touch and go type thing, and she doesn't really want to acknowledge it. And like Ty also too, like they're in a weird position because of her like not wanting to acknowledge it. And I think also he doesn't know how to be there for her. but it's more of a thing too where she's also not really vocalizing how she truly feels. It's very like, I think she just internalizes a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I would agree to that. I feel like those scenes when she's in her car and she's kind of like by herself, there are a couple of them, and she just kind of like sits and like whatever's happened that day shows a lot about her character. I think that or like her, I guess her internal monologue would be the scene that contrasts with her like recounting her experience with the abortion, with her being assigned to give the girls pelvic exams. In that moment when she remembers that she never saw the tools that were used on her and she can't do that to those girls. And I just thought that was a very powerful, I don't know, scene, comparison, moment.
Yeah, in many ways also, because you talk about how Sybil throws herself into this work, it's reminiscent of her mother. And her mother throws herself into her art, into painting.
Yeah.
And I wonder if her mother has some form of like, maybe like bipolar or depression or some mental health struggles, because she describes how her mother never really seemed like she wanted to be a mother. Her mother's never really close to her. And she also describes the scene of like seeing her father like carry her mother out of the studio. Yeah.
At first I assumed postpartum depression.
Well, because she did talk about that.
Yeah. She was like, she said, I think having a baby made it worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I assumed postpartum depression, and then like as we kind of uncovered more, it was like maybe her mom always had like this type of thing, and I don't know, but it sounds like she had very high highs, and then she would just be like, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for?
Have like episodes of like depression. Yeah.
Or like mellow.
Yeah, I think too, like you said, I think, and like Sybil said, postpartum depression, like further already, like her having depression just kind of worsened it. She did talk about though that her mother always like got dressed in like kind of similar clothes to go painting, but she always would throw water in her face, and she would also always put lipstick on too. And I think that might be because maybe years ago like someone told her to do that, or she just found like that is like the bare minimum that she does for herself to like help herself like get up and like have the ability to go paint. And I think the way that Sybil talks about her mom's depression, I think it's a good way to talk about depression because she's not villainizing her mother. I think in fact she is trying to understand the situation better. Like I think a lot of times characters sometimes they get angry at their parents or upset. But with Sybil, because I think she is a nurse and she also is studying medicine too, she takes the stance of it's not her fault. Like she is trying her best. Like I wish her best was maybe looking a little different, but Sybil knows, I think, that her mom is trying. Her mom is just not in like the headspace to do certain things. So I thought that was a really good analysis from the character.
One thing I wonder is, well actually it's two things. I wonder if it's her mom always put on lipstick because of their class and this idea of like keeping up appearances, because they're because it's very much like they're not socialites, maybe isn't the word I'm looking for, but they have a position in society.
Yes.
Yeah. And then another thing I wonder is, because Sybil's telling the story back and forth, and so she opens it up and she's like, oh, there's so much I need to tell you, and it's referring to her daughter. So I wonder, even when she goes back in time to 1973, we have that switch from 2016 to 1973, is it because she's like, okay, this is what happened then? And because it's all in like first person, but like I wonder if she has so much compassion for her mother also because
she's like reflecting on it.
Yeah, she's reflecting on it.
Yeah, I think it might be a little bit of both, to be honest. I also think too, like, and this is kind of like jumping ahead of it too, like Sybil took an entirely different route than her friend Alicia. Like, you know, her friend, she got married, she stopped being a nurse, like, she totally different life, right? Also, another thing that I really enjoyed reading, and also I think this might be something that is telling of Sybil, like, Sybil, she has locks, which I love, because we obviously have locks too.
I wonder, sorry.
No, go ahead.
But I was wondering, did she always have them, or was that something that happened later in life?
I think that's something that might have happened later in life.
I think so too.
Like if I had to guess, because also too, just thinking about like upper higher society, like in Alabama, you know, like this notion of like hair and what it means and everything. And I think her having locks at her older age, her living like in a little bungalow in Memphis, and her driving an older Volvo too, even though she's very successful, right? I think it's kind of her way of maybe like small acts of like, you know, I'm doing maybe what I want to do. You know, I'm not really worried about what other people are thinking or like what society thinks. And I think that is a really powerful statement as a Black woman.
Yeah. Hair holds a lot of imagery in the book. Oh, were you gonna?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I think the first moment that like, it kind of correlates to her too, but the Kmart scene in the scene following, like chapter 8, there's, let me see if I can find it. There's a moment where people are watching them.
Is it page 50?
Yeah, it's page 50, and India wants to ride on the toy horse, like the ones that go around, and then this is Sybil. Climb on. I put a quarter in the machine, and India swung her leg over the horse. The lights came on, and out of the speakers came a statically tinkle of music, like an ice cream truck. The horse rose. India made a clicking noise in the back of her throat that was so loud people stopped and gasped and gaped. Some of the passbyers steered clear of us in the girl's body odor. I tried not to make eye contact with the strangers. When the ride finished, I put another quarter in and watched as India threw her head back. I added another quarter, and another until I ran out. The more she squealed, the more people stared. I went to customer service counter and asked for $1 worth of quarters. Erica laughed at her sister's delight, while I hoped no one said anything to me. And there's kind of this moment of like India's joy and also the public's perception of that joy, but yet Sybil keeps adding more quarters. I thought that was a really beautiful scene. And then later on, she braids their hair, and you know they have like that really nice moment.
Right. No, I thought that was a really good scene too. I also thought another scene that was really nice was like Sybil and her mom have an interesting relationship, obviously for myriad reasons. One thing I really did love though was how Sybil's mom, like, you know, talked about the apartment and also gave her money to go to Goodwill and like buy furniture and help, you know, the Williams family. Sybil thought her mom wasn't really even like paying attention, you know, but I think Sybil's mom, like, when she does have those moments, you know, because she is in like a constant battle, I think, with herself, but when she has those moments where she feels like she can do more, she does more. And I do think that's really beautiful, and I think it goes to show that just because you don't maybe have like a traditional relationship with the parent doesn't mean there isn't any like love or compassion there. I think that was an act from Sybil's mom saying to Sybil, you know, like, I believe in you, I believe in what you're doing. And I thought that was really nice too.
It was really nice. So we brought it up earlier, but I kind of want to circle back to it because the book, it's all based on this road trip, right? She's driving from Memphis to Montgomery, right, where she grew up, in Memphis, where she lives now. And so what role do we think the road, cars, this idea of a road trip plays in the book? And this was just interesting to me, especially because we grew up taking road trips to Alabama and to South Carolina, where our parents are from. And so we know what it's like to be in a car for a long time. So what ways do you guys think that shows up in this, and what's the symbolism of it to you? What do you see?
Do you have anything, Sydney?
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking a little bit.
Yeah, I think that it was really interesting the way that they kind of used the road trip, because we don't really get much of her in the car, like driving or waiting. But I think the moment that stood out to me that made me think, like really think thoughtfully about her actually being on the road and driving for so long was when Alicia called it an apology tour. And she was like, are you doing an apology tour? And Sybil kind of like takes a moment and she's like, she thinks to herself like, I don't think I am, but I might be. And that kind of made me think of like why she would make the drive, because that's a hard drive. And I'm only sitting in the passenger side, you know, like I'm over there like in the back seat.
And she's driving by herself too.
Yes, and I also think that like, I don't know what exactly is going on with Sybil, but in the very beginning on like page like 6, she says, I suppose I will still be asking the same question when I'm standing over my own grave. And Sybil talks a lot about death.
She does.
And I'm like, is she dying? Or she's just starting to feel like herself getting older? So it's like, why would an older person?
And also, India has cancer too.
Yes.
I want to say too, which is like another layer on top of the layers. When you talked about Alicia saying like, is this an apology tour? And you talk about the road symbolization. I think Sybil coming back home is like a symbol of her coming to terms with like her past, present, and then like getting herself right for like her future or like what is to come. Obviously, we're still in part 1, so I don't know anything yet.
Yeah.
But one moment that sticks out to me was when like she sits in Ty's office. He's now like the president of a whole college, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. I think it's cool.
But they're talking and going back and forth, and then they start talking about the abortion. And she never told anybody, but he told his wife.
And she gets really mad.
Yeah, she was like, I think that's the first time we really see Sybil like for 2016 version, obviously, like genuinely upset. And she's kind of like heartbroken in a way because, you know, even though this was something that was very terrible and like traumatic that happened to her, like she used as like traumatic that happened to her, she still was like, you know, that was supposed to be between like me and you, like that was something like that happened because of like us together, you know. And then she has like this, you know, moment where she's like crying, and then she gets embarrassed because she's like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm, you know, one of his students in his office like crying about something, you know. So I think that moment was really interesting. And I also think too, even when she was crying, Ty like kind of consists a little bit, and that goes to show like even after all these years, like he still knows her.
Yeah.
Like he still knows her, and she still knows him. So I think that in that moment it was saying like, even though so much has changed, they as people haven't changed that much, because there's still this level of like, I know you and you know me. So I thought that was really interesting.
That's why it's so shocking in a way when like he goes, when you came home, and you rarely did because your parents always came to you when you were in med school. You came home, I didn't know about it until after you left.
Right.
And so it's like, man, I feel like you kind of have to actively avoid someone to not see them, especially when it's like a small town. Even though Montgomery's not small, but like their community, everyone knows each other. Yeah. So it's like she was actively avoiding him, and he was like, I thought about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I think he always like kept a piece of her in his heart. And I think she might have been the same too, but she just didn't maybe necessarily come to terms with it as much, you know? I think Ty, after a certain point, he had to like let it go.
Yeah.
You know? I think that even though like in one of the chapters of the book, she talks about how Ty was like, oh, you know, you're pregnant, like, I'm gonna marry you.
Yeah.
And she was like, what are you talking about right now? You know, so I think even though she's like, oh my gosh, we kind of meet Ty at first and we're like, what is this guy doing? He's like a little silly goofy, like, get away from her. But then as we move through part 1, we're like, oh, you know, there's this complicated relationship, but Ty genuinely cares for her. And then in the 2016 time jump, we see even after all these years, like, Ty still does care for her, but I think it was a thing where he had to move on for like his own sake, because that is tough. Like you visit your parents back home, someone is there who like loves you, is trying to like pursue you in a way, and you just like don't say anything.
Yeah,
you know,
it's really sad. I think there was the moment, I forgot exactly what she said, but she said something to the effect of she treated his laid back attitude as like goofiness or something to that effect. Yeah, I don't know where it is, but I literally have in my notes, I literally wrote that relationship makes me so sad because in another life they probably would have been happy and together.
Yeah, but I think Sybil too, she at some point, right, like she's helping these girls do these things, right? Some people in the story view her, I think, as like not having children, like biologically, or not having a husband, as like she was just too busy for all that, right? But I think Sybil made like that conscious choice.
I agree.
Like, I don't think it was a thing where one day she just woke up and she was 50 years old and she was like, well, I guess it's kind of too late for me to have a baby and get married. I think that was a conscious decision that Sybil made for whatever reason, right? And I'm sure there are other reasons will be like revealed in the book, but I think that was a conscious choice for her. And I like that the author doesn't really like portray Sybil as having shame around that.
Yeah.
I think her shame more comes from her leaving so abruptly and kind of being like, okay, bye, see you never.
Yeah.
But I do like how the author doesn't really place her shame in not having a husband or not giving birth to children.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that she said like the setup around her becoming a mother when she wanted to become a mother. I also think that it was like very interesting when she's like reflecting to Annie and she's like, and she's doing all this from like a place of love, because I think if she didn't have to, she wouldn't, but she kind of sets it up as like it's time for Annie to know this, and she feels like it's a hindrance for her not to.
Yeah.
So all this, like you're hearing all this, but you know it's coming from like a place of love and not of like this like type of thing to like alleviate her guilt, but more so her daughter knows. And I thought that was like, I thought that was a really interesting way to set it up.
I couldn't find it, but it's in chapter 19.
Okay.
But yeah, that relationship, it's just it's so layered.
Yeah.
Right? And also a relationship with motherhood is so layered.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say I really love the different mothers that are shown throughout the book, like
the maternal figures.
Yeah, like
and she's taking care of her mother too.
Yes.
Like, in the 2016 time zone.
Which is really interesting because we don't really hear about like the paternal figure. We hear about the maternal figure more often. Like
I think it's very fitting though, like because it is a book about like Black women and like Black bodies, like bodily autonomy. So I think I kind of like the lack of like mention of like paternal like figures too much, because it really does like make you in this mindset of like I want every Black woman in this book to win. Yeah, and I like that.
I really appreciate. There's this character that's briefly mentioned, who is a mother of 6. And the singer is trying to convince her to get a surgery so she can have any more children. And the woman has this moment and she says, God promised me a husband, and what if I want to have a baby with my husband? And I think the way that this is kind of like such a contrast to the way Sybil thinks.
Yeah.
Because this woman is talking about like what does a child actually mean, and what does it mean to have a child and be in a relationship. Because Miss Seeger, the supervisor, responds by saying, but you already have 6 children already, ain't got enough for any husband. So we're also looking at it as a way to pass down like genes and have, I don't know, something to be a part of.
Yeah.
And I think that like the moments where Sybil is reflecting back on her life and she's wondering, if I did have a biological child, would they look like me? And I also think that was a beautiful line, like God promised me a husband. Like that was so telling. Like,
it's also interesting because like we don't know anything about the character. We don't know the 6 children's ages. We don't know the relationships that she was in or lack of relationships she was in when she had those 6 children. So it really just boils down to like this woman should be allowed to make her own decisions, whether we agree with them or not.
Yeah.
So to tie up this conversation, I have one more question, and that question is, who is responsible for ensuring that community is safe?
I think every community member has a responsibility that's like solely individualized to them, and I think that responsibility looks different. But I think it is the responsibility of the entire community to make sure that their community is safe. And I also think too, like, a lot of times people would say, oh, well, like, it's this advocate over here, this political figure over here. But history has shown that's not necessarily true. Like, sometimes it's not the advocate who is keeping the community safe, you know, it's maybe a matriarchal figure or a patriarchal figure. Maybe it's a group of teenagers, you know, trying to do more outreach. Maybe it's just, you know, neighbors looking out for each other. But I think that if a community that is safe and successful is highly dependent on how much of responsibility is shared throughout the community.
I'm gonna flip this question a little bit, because you asked who's responsible for keeping community safe. And I'm gonna say the people who do keep the community safe are the people who are willing to question what's going on in the community.
Yes.
I think that Civil and her group of friends, people that they know, they're willing to kind of question what they're seeing. And I also think that Miss
Pope?
Yes.
Miss Pope.
I think that she was willing to question, and she really does a great job by like questioning her role in all of this. And she kind of has this moment, she's like, I work here, what's going on right underneath my nose.
Sticky.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of what this book is about. Like, the people who are willing to question it will do the most good in the community. I don't know.
That's
what about
a
you?
really good point. I think for me, and especially within the context of this book, it's not only the like community members that are experiencing or in a position rather to have more resources that they can feel like they can give back, but it's also listening to the people who are experiencing the struggle, who are experiencing the pain, who are experiencing the problem, and ensuring that their voices are heard, because we actively see people's voices just being ignored because they can't write, because they can't read, because they don't know someone in Washington.
Right.
So it's about actively making sure those voices are heard. But this book has been so amazing. Thank you so much for reading part 1 and for trusting me to make our first book club selection. And thank you for joining us on YouTube. We hope that you guys will be back here for our next installment for part 2. We're so excited. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.